Hello, my name is ZBradley. I will be giving a speech today about isolationism and its effect on the United States of America. This speech is entitled, "No Country is an Island: Why Isolationism Doesn't Work in the 21st Century." Rwandan genocide. In 1994, President Bill Clinton's administration knew Rwanda was being engulfed by genocide. However, classified documents made available for the first time in 2004 showed that the administration buried the information to justify its inaction. In these once secret government documents, senior officials privately used the word genocide within 16 days of the start of the killings, but chose not to do so publicly because the president had already decided to do nothing. 20 years later, after seeing the atrocities of Rwanda and the blatant disregard for human life, one would think that American citizens would be eager to intervene to save lives. However, Americans, jaded with the failures of previous generations and the failures of their own, have begun to desire the end of America as a global major player. They argue that we are not the world's policemen, nor its judge and jury. Our own needs are great and come first. This opinion is so prevalent among Americans that according to a recent poll done by the Pew Study in December of 2013, 52% argued that America should merely mind its own business. Fatigued after 12 years of continual foreign wars with high casualties and questionable results, Americans have begun to resent war and intervention. The recent Syrian conflict particularly shows the unwillingness of the American people to send troops to get involved in another high-cost, far-away war. However, I am not here today to advocate isolationism. I am also not speaking to you tonight in a blanket statement of support for President Obama's administration. What I hope to accomplish is to illustrate how complex these decisions are and how you have to evaluate foreign conflicts. Because of this, I believe that the United States should favor interventionism over isolationism in its foreign policies for the 21st century, because America has a duty to protect its citizens and its interests. It is important to have a good understanding of isolationism. Proponents for this foreign policy argue that America should not ever use its power to put pressure on any nation. This form of isolationism prohibits America from using any means, whether economic or militaristic, to stop a country from engaging in activities that it does not approve of. This form of isolationism is the type I will be addressing in this speech. In response to isolationism, the view of the interventionist was developed. The interventionist argues that America should use its power to prevent foreign states from fighting in wars or engaging in activities that America does not approve of. This power, also called the instruments of national security, comes in many forms: diplomacy, the use of information, military operations, and economic pressure. These are represented by the easy-to-remember acrostic coined by Eric Littlehart, dying. But first, in order to understand why isolationism benefits America, why interventionism benefits America, we need to understand the dangers of isolationism. First, I will examine the potential dangers of isolationism. I will show how it ultimately endangers its citizens rather than protects them. Next, I will examine if isolationism could exist in the modern world. I will show that America cannot escape the conflicts of the modern world. Finally, I will discuss the proper use of American power. In order to do this, I will examine each instrument of national security separately. I will show how a wise country will apply the four components of DIME to achieve their national security objectives. Isolationism seems like the perfect foreign policy. Its logic argues that if you do not bother another country, they won't bother you. It is like the old proverb, live and let live. While this may work between individuals, history has shown that it is not a good foreign policy. Isolationism provides false comfort. I argue this because of the development of weapons in the 21st century. With the power of today's nuclear weapons and the intercontinental ballistic missiles which carry them, nations are able to eliminate other nations from the other side of the world before they can retaliate. Because of this, America must ensure two things: solid foreign relationships and also that these weapons never fall into the hands of those who would use them. Isolationism ensures neither. Through tireless diplomatic efforts over the past 60 years, nuclear warfare has been largely avoided. Examples of these diplomatic efforts are the strategic arms limitation treaties and the installation of the Moscow-Washington hotline that helps ensure nuclear conflicts can be avoided. Failure to avoid nuclear war would be catastrophic and would lead to the destruction of both nations. Terrorist organizations, on the other hand, do not have concerns about such things. If they were able to obtain nuclear weapons during a revolution or through a corrupt government, they would not hesitate and would be ready and willing to use them. Another potential threat that faces America is the threat of foreign revolutions, especially revolutions in countries that have weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction have changed how we view faraway foreign wars. Isolationists would argue that rebellions and revolutions will stay confined. However, we have recently seen how the power of social media can allow uprisings in one nation to quickly spread throughout the whole world. The Arab Spring is an example of this. The Arab Spring quickly bloomed into a flower that spread revolution and death throughout Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Syria. In the case of Syria, a collapse of the government threatened to allow terrorist groups like Hezbollah to gain access to Syria's chemical weapons supply, which could have been used against America or its ally, Israel. America can no longer hope to ignore revolution and hope that it will quickly die down. It must respond to each revolution quickly in order to ensure an outcome that doesn't threaten its citizens, and one that is fair to the people of the country embroiled in conflict. False comfort is only the first problem of isolationism. The second problem comes when you try to apply it. Our world is highly interconnected. Distances which once seemed insurmountable in the past can now be traversed in a matter of hours or days. The world economy has developed greatly during the past 50 years. New states have developed and every country is vying for power. Competition for scarce resources means conflicts are bound to develop. And if America is not willing to respond with some type of force, it will lose credibility with its allies and formidability among its foes. The only country that is willing to defend America's rights is America. Other countries would be more than eager to quickly assume the power that America forfeits if it does not protect its economic rights. The second reason why America cannot adopt an isolationist foreign policy is because it has never succeeded in the past in avoiding major conflicts in the past. Consider America's response to the World War I. While America tried to remain isolationist in the early years of World War I, Germany tried to incite Mexico into war with America through the infamous Zimmermann Cable, a ploy to keep America from entering the war in Europe. Nearly 20 years later, America tried to remain isolationist again in response to Hitler's aggression in Europe. Although America originally sought to avoid the conflict, they were forcefully drawn into the conflict by the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. Japan and Germany saw America as a threat, and even though America had not yet engaged, they suspected danger and addressed it by trying to force America out from ever being able to fight in a war. If America was unable to avoid major conflicts in the 20th century, why do we think we can avoid war in the 21st century, which is even more interconnected? If isolationism does not work and cannot be implemented, what ought we to do? America's only response is interventionism. By interventionism, I am not suggesting America plunge headlong into wars with their military, but if an isolationist policy puts America at risk and harms American citizens, America must not pursue it. America must instead pursue a foreign policy that uses all of its instruments of national security to protect its interests and its citizens. This foreign policy is called an interventionist hegemonic policy approach by Patrick Callahan in his book, The Logic of American Foreign Policy. Hegemony, which can be defined as preponderant influence or authority, especially of one nation over another, is the only way to protect the interests of America. With this foreign policy, America will be able to protect its interests and its citizens. An interventionist foreign policy does not mean that America would be using its military more. On the other hand, interventionism argues that for the four-pronged use of power. As I mentioned before, these four instruments of foreign power can be represented by the acrostic DIME: diplomatic pressure, information dominance, military intervention, and economic pressure. Depending on the situation, America can employ all or some of the instruments of foreign power. Most people tend to focus on a one-dimensional power project, for example, military intervention. But successful resolution of international conflict usually depends on using all of these instruments of foreign power in concert. As such, in order to answer the threat of an Iranian nuclear program, America might seek to create a trade embargo against the nation using economic pressure, threaten military intervention, apply diplomatic pressure, and sway the world in the information domain by saturating the media with the U.S. position. The beauty of this approach is to be able to use a different mixture of the instruments of foreign power for different situations. This allows a country to avoid military intervention in an already insecure nation lest they totally topple it. Also, while military intervention may be too severe, economic pressure may be just enough to make the erring nation see its error. The key to a proper use of DIME in a strong interventionist country is an understanding of proportionality. If a country refuses to cut their CO2 emissions, the other country must not start a bombing raid to get them to stop, but rather have diplomatic talks to convince them of their position. An example of a proportional response would be Operation Desert Storm. President Bush offered a red line that could not be crossed, but when Saddam Hussein crossed it, America answered back. If America does adopt and properly use the instruments of DIME, then they will naturally become a hegemonic power. Since isolationism causes the decline of nations, America must avoid it at any cost. Pursuing a foreign policy of hegemony is the opposite course. In this interconnected world, America must take its rightful place as hegemon. No other nation has both the means and the will to do so. While China may have a strong army and an equally strong economy, they have no interest in protecting other countries, as demonstrated by their current quarrel with India for oil in the East China Sea. Britain, another strong power, looks to the United States. Russia, which might be seen as a possible world leader, lacks moral credibility because of their recent maltreatment of human rights and imperialistic ventures into Ukraine. Only the United States has both the moral authority and power to lead the world. America does not only have a moral responsibility to protect its own citizens, but also to protect the citizens of other countries. Christians have a moral obligation to defend the human rights of men over the world. Not only do Christians have a duty to protect citizens from having their rights abused by governments, but governments also have a duty to be the servants of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. As such, a government with a Christian basis must seek to ensure the governments which have strayed away from rights are punished. Our world is becoming more and more dangerous. Russia is starting to thirst for power, and its annexation of Crimea and threat to invade Ukraine show just how far they are willing to go to gain that power. America must quickly learn its position in the world and how it should respond to Russia's attempts to become a hegemonic power. America must respond by carefully using all its instruments of foreign power, especially economic pressure, to put Russia's grab for land and power in check, and to avoid a military conflict that could escalate into nuclear war. Christians have a duty to respond to human rights violations. If America does not respond to revolutions, they are scorning the human lives which are being lost in them. Because of this, America must assume its hegemonic policy, or if it does not, it ignores the cries of the abused. Thank you.
Did you touch on Syria in any of the examples?
I took out most of my stuff about Syria. I did touch on it with my first example, first one, when I talked about the Arab Spring and how the collapse of government threatened allowing terrorist organizations access to their chemical weapons supply. However, I took out the main narratio about Syrian conflict since it was so long and was bogging down the speech, I felt.
I put that in the blurb in the program because that was part of your thesis. So the fact that you don't address anything there is kind of like, oh, well. Give some thought to that.
Okay.
Go back and look at that blurb that I sent to you and see if you can, just even a sentence would be nice.
Yeah, hadn't you, before, weren't you saying that we dealt with Syria through one of these, I don't know, diplomatic talks?
Right,
Well,
right. I thought you had in
So
your
that's another
previous.
example of us using time.
Yeah, I can put that into my third point if you would like that brought out more as another proportional solution.
Would that
An
help?
explanation.
Yeah, I thought your because statement actually had Syria in it.
I don't think so.
I
Yeah.
took it out in this draft. Well,
Okay.
my because clause never had it in it, but it was for this speech, since I really didn't have time to talk about Syria as much as I did in my paper, I kind of changed my thesis statement to more align with what my speech was about, since I took out the narratio with all the Syria background.
Yeah, that kind of raises an issue. The way that the manual, it kind of doesn't say to put an oratio in there. I think that that is missing a great context for our discussion. I think that there should be some oratio in there. That's my personal feeling. Otherwise, you're just,
You meant in the speech.
yeah,
Otherwise, there's no background.
yeah.
Like kind of
That's my-
expect
Huh?
nothing.
What'd you say, Zach?
I kind of start to cover it. I
Okay.
bring up the Syrian conflict and how this is a response to it, how we need to be this instead of
Okay,
ignoring it.
okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. I have an answer, hopefully.
Alright, so you mentioned that the United States adopt a hegemonic policy.
Yes.
Wouldn't such a policy require that the United States military be kept at a very high level?
Yes.
Do you think that that would be a proper use of American economic resources?
Yes.
Considering.
Okay. Free way to go.
Any other
When you
questions?
said that we need to protect economic rights, what did you mean by rights?
Economic rights, economic interest is another term for that. If we need to make sure that our businesses are able to perform what they want in other countries, that they're not being denied anything just because they're American businesses or anything in that vein. Also, when I'm talking about American economic interests, I'm talking about our oil supply, making sure that we secure the resources that we need for our country to grow.
Okay. Interests and rights seem different to me. That's why I was wondering what you meant by rights.
Okay.
I get interests, but rights just, for me anyway.
Okay, thank you. How long was that Q&A?
4 minutes, 15 seconds. And your speech was 14:42.
Okay.